Are you filled with fear, doubt, worry about the future of our country? Do you feel the urgency to act before it's too late? If yes, then this podcast is for you. It's time for us to confront the critical issues threatening our nation's fabric, our democracy itself, regardless of our political stance. If you are ready to face reality, handle the tough questions, and find real solutions, then here's your host, Debilyn.
Welcome to the Terrified Nation podcast. I'm your host, Debilyn Molyneux. Can we save it? That's what we're exploring in this podcast. And for me, the answer is always, still is, will be forever. Yes, we can save the United States, and we must. Now, this show is where we explore alternatives to being afraid. And we interview guests who have gone from being afraid or angry or hopeless, perhaps like you, and become advocates for our nation to live into the promise of our founders. And each one of our guests has dedicated themselves to a better future, just like you can. And for those of you who've listened for a while, you know that I like to start each show with a question that we'll explore together. And today's question is, what does the term civic engagement really mean? And we'll dive into this with our guest, Amy McIsaac. Now, Amy is the managing director for learning and experimentation as a team member with PACE, which stands for Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, sensing a theme, right? And PACE is a member-centric philanthropic laboratory for funders who want to maximize their impact on democracy and civic life. So when we ask, what is civic engagement? This is something that Amy will share more about later in the interview. A couple of more highlights about Amy. She is a proud AmeriCorps alum, and she has led multiple nonprofit organizations that are focused on community engagement and service over her career, including LIFT, which is an anti-poverty effort, and Two Seeds Network. Now, most notably, Amy was also part of the leadership team that established Service Year Alliance in 2015. So I was off starting Bridge Alliance, Amy was off starting Service Year Alliance. There's a theme here. Amy lives in Boston, Providence area with her husband and her 3 kids. So Amy, welcome to the show. Is there anything that you'd like to add as we get started?
That was a great intro. Thank you for having me. The other thing I would add actually, and inspired by your intro and talking more about this podcast, in my quote unquote spare time, my husband and I actually operate a school in our town, and it is a daycare early education center. So that is also a big part of how my husband and I give back to our local community, and also a big part of where I spend my time.
Oh, that's just fabulous. I'll talk a little bit more about this interview that we're going to have, but I don't want to spill the beans too much too soon. And listeners of this show do know that we like to ask people about their dreams for the future. And it's part of a research project to help everyday Americans imagine a future that doesn't suck. Now, all the big media stories out there show us a future that really doesn't appeal. And one of our best ways to overcome our fears and to stop being a terrified nation is to decide what we actually want for ourselves. And so I love that you're already starting by introducing this idea of the daycare and early education that you and your husband are doing. Anything else you want to add here?
I don't think so. Yeah, that's pretty much all I spend my time on. Yes. Kids, school, and my job. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so we're going to start the formal interview now because there are some standard questions, and of course we're going to wander from those.
Right.
And the thing that I want to set up with you is that as you think about the questions as we go through this, we're actually asking about your preferred future. So not what you think is likely or probable. And we're going to do some time travel. So we're going to time travel into your preferred future, somewhere between 2 and 20 years. At least that's our recommendation. What do you want to try? How far into the future?
Let's do the 20, because my youngest will have just left home at that point. So I'll be kind of post raising kids. That would be a good place to imagine.
Empty nest. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're going to jump into our time machine. We're going to take a couple of deep breaths. If you want to close your eyes, feel free. And as we get into this time machine where you're going to be an empty nester in 2044, when we get there, you're still going to be your current self, but you're going to observe a future self like a split screen. And we're pulling right now into the 2044 station. And here we are arriving. Ding! Here we are in your preferred future in 2044. And so we're going to ask these questions as you look and see what is there for you. And the first question that I have is like, where are you in 20 years?
I don't know where I am physically, but I do know that I have a clear picture of my children and my husband and myself. The physical location isn't like super clear in my mind, but there's a coziness feeling at bay. You know, there's a sense of belonging, there's a sense of coziness, kind of hunkering down in our little safety space as a family. Yeah.
And what kind of surroundings are like, are you in the mountains at near the ocean? Like what do you imagine in your what do you prefer in 2044 to be near?
Yeah. My husband and I, in 2022, I was pregnant with my third child, and there were some early complications. And anyway, I was having some hard conversations with my doctors on a Friday. Roe v. Wade was overturned on Saturday. And then my family went up to Canada on Sunday for a family vacation we already had planned. Anyway, we bought some land in Canada on that trip. And it wasn't because of all of that, but it was, I think, a hope about where our family could really be long term. And so my husband's family immigrated from this part of Canada and Prince Edward Island. So we know we always wanted to kind of reconnect back there. And for a lot of reasons, this opportunity kind of found us. So we own this plot of land in Prince Edward Island. We don't have any home on it, but my husband and I use it to really co-dream together and think about what is this generational home, something that we can build for us, for our kids, for their kids, for their kids and beyond. Even the ways like, you know, while we're brushing our teeth, we'll say, what about if we had a room that was just so that all the kids, whoever comes over there over all the generations could bunk up together. Like we're really kind of co-creating. So in that 20 years from now picture, I'm in that home that we have built and really intend to be something that is a convening space for our family long term.
Tell me a little bit more about Prince Edward Island then, because that actually you went from being not very specific to very specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm learning a lot about it myself. It really is a passion and a happy place for my husband. My maiden name is Baker, and I married a McIsaac that everyone puts like Z's and Q's in when they try to name it. But when you go there, everyone knows that name. It is a sturdy Canadian name in that way. It's a very easy place to live. It's a very easy place to be. It's largely rural, even though it's an island. The population is small. It's seasonal. Um, and it just has this really beautiful and unique environment. It's got red sand. It's known for its red sand. If anyone's a fan of Anne of Green Gables, the land that we bought was 5 minutes from the museum, her house. And so that is what you should think of is Anne of Green Gables when you think of PEI. I think what appeals to my husband and what he's always been trying to help me kind of grow into is a slower pace of life.
Mm.
And that is hard for me. You know, I like the zippy, I like the moving, I like the high energy, but he has such a solid core around presence and around calmness and around appreciating the small things that PEI is such a safe place and a beautiful place through his eyes, and I have really grown to appreciate it as well. So it felt like for many reasons, like the right place for us to think about a long-term picture for our family in the future.
So as you create this future for yourself and your family and build some heritage at PEI, what will you be most proud of?
For sure, it'll be the bonds that my kids have and the way that they would and we would be prioritizing quality time together in a world that otherwise tells us to move and to shake and to produce and to move and all the time move, right? And to provide a safe haven, right? A place for life to be a little bit different, a little more tied to land and a lot more tied to each other. And so I would be really proud of, my kids and their kids really falling in love with what that place is for them. I would be incredibly proud of them having a harmonious way of stewarding the land when my husband and I go. And how does that get passed to the next generation, the next generation, the next generation? Having it be a really beautiful, loving exchange of tradition and heritage down the generations. Yeah, that's what and honestly, Debilyn, just that it would exist, I'd be proud of in 20 years because, my husband and I are in Massachusetts. We're raising our kids here. We have a lot of obligations here and not looking to make a full-time move to Canada probably ever, and certainly not even a part-time one anytime soon. So when we sit here, my husband and I, and we look at like how the math is mathing in a month, it's like, gosh, that house feels so far away for us. But we keep dreaming and we put a little bit away that we can. And if it even just existed in 20 years, I think we would be incredibly proud.
Well, and I just want to like remind you that we're talking here about your preference,
Yep.
not about what is likely or probable,
Yeah.
because what our hearts desire is what our hearts desire.
Yep.
And
Ender.
I'm actually having so much fun in doing these interviews and helping people hold their dreams alive,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what form it takes,
Mm-hmm.
when we actually ground it.
Mm-hmm.
So walk me through, we're 20 years from now and you've built this family home on PEI, and your kids are there, but how will you spend your day?
That is a good question because I have no idea. I like PEI for its calmness, its easy goingness, but I'm like I get bored there so quick. So I think I will have new hobbies that I don't even know yet. Like I'm a big crafter, so maybe some new crafts on the horizon, but I think just being better about being in nature and appreciating slow time. Um, I think that's probably how I'll spend my time. My husband and I also joke that like we'll do half the year in PEI and then we'll do half the year in like Manhattan just so I can get like my itches scratched.
Well,
You know,
and
I like
I'm curious also, like you have this history of community building, and I don't know that PEI necessarily needs you to organize community, a sense of community there, but I'm wondering about what your engagement in the local community might be like.
yeah, I do too. And I think that's why it'll always be a place that well, assuming we can hold on to the land and all these things happen, like it'll be a place that we spend some time, but not all time. Because I
Hmm.
think the longer we live where we're living and with our kids and the school that we run, it's like we're really ingrained in this community and getting more
Yeah.
so every day. And so that's definitely not something I think we'd walk away from entirely.
So as we think about then in just kind of modifying, if you will, maybe your 20-year vision is you're actually spending half the time in the safe retreat space and half the time in the busy hustle bustle, or
Yeah,
2/3, 1/3, or whatever the mix is.
that would be ideal.
Yeah. Well, and when we think about how you're spending your time, we talked about how you might spend your time when you're in the safe retreat. How might you spend your time when you're in the hustle bustle?
I'd be at the Comedy Cellar every single night. I love stand-up comedy. It's all I ever want to do, is sit and listen to comedians comment on the world and the absurdity of it with such intelligence and humor. I'm just so in awe of that craft. And so, yeah, I'd probably go there, walk around. I love to just wander and see what you see and see who you see and chat with whoever's around and just being in the world. So the more hustle, the better for me. The more bustle, the better. I really love getting into that energy. But I've also lived in a bunch of cities and know how lonely that can feel too. Even though you're around a lot of people, you may not be connecting. So figuring out like how to be in that space, but still achieving some sense of belonging and community is key.
So your preference would be to have belonging in both the busy city life and in the rural retreat life. So
Yeah,
you have a sense of belonging in both places.
definitely. Yep.
Right. Well, how do you think you'll feel most of the time? And feel free to keep, if you want to keep the half and half, like you're living in two different places. Uh, how will you feel most of the time?
I imagine I'll feel, hmm.
And this is preferred. Again, I just to remind you,
Yeah.
this is preferred.
Yeah, so my preference is to feel at ease. But also, and this is like the fact that I'm saying the sentence, I think is like the core of so much tension for me. Like I I I prefer to feel at ease and productive. Like somehow I contributed to something and something exists because I existed. I think that's why I love creating things so much. It's like it's a real proof of life, proof of contribution. And so that's what comes to mind, Debbie Lynn, when you ask the question of how will I feel. I will feel like I am making a contribution and that I can see kind of why I'm here, but I also don't feel pressure and stress around that the way sometimes, the daily life of today can bring.
Mhm. So I'm going to put a couple words in your mouth here and feel free to reject them, but what I'm hearing is that how you will feel most of the time is that your life mattered or
Hmm.
that your time matters or that there's a sense of not just contribution, but that somebody receives a contribution.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, and I think too, I imagine that there is some sense, at least I'm betting a lot right now that will be true. So it would be my preference that I bet correctly, but that a lot of the heart of right now and the season of life I'm in right now with young kids and basically two full-time jobs, like that pays off. Like I see some return that is much larger. The type of return you can only really see after a couple decades, of like seeing the seeds that you planted really blooming. And so I think about that a lot with my kids where, I'm stressed all the time with three kids under 6. And I'm just like, but I'm really excited about the adults they're gonna be. I'm really excited about who they're showing us they are and the way that that is growing, and, like, I wanna hang out with them, like, they're great. I can see it, and it's about, like, maybe feeling a little of that return or a little of that I don't even know what else to call it. Yeah, return, in
Well,
20 years.
my sense of from what you're saying that it's not necessarily that the return is coming back to you, but you're paying it forward and you're seeing how it
Mm,
ripples out. That's
that's a
what I'm
better way to put
that's
it.
what I'm actually hearing from you.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. That the investment, uh it's not even right to call it investment, but the work I'm doing right now will reap benefits down the way
Mhm.
for the world, right? And for the
Yeah.
people that I'm in.
Yeah, in the American future language, I talk about it like what's the future that's worth it to sacrifice now,
Yes, 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 yes. That's
right?
a great,
Or to put in extra effort now so that there's something that's worth it later.
yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, and it really does it's a huge act of faith, right? It's a huge act of faith. And I talk a lot in my job, and I know we'll get to it later, but democracy is one of the craziest requests of faith. And we try to act like faith doesn't have a component in our secular citizen life. But like we have to every day tap into some practice of believing the unbelievable, that we can actually live in this sort of community together. So yeah, I think I'm really sitting with like, how do you flex that muscle and how do you build that muscle of believing in a future and really, really sacrificing for a future that like you don't know is actually going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's some interdependence that it relies on the community itself too.
Yeah.
So, beyond our love of rugged individualism here in the United States, there is an element of interdependence that I don't think we have fully lived into yet.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah. So this next question here is really, thinking about or observing your future self, your 20-year self with your preferred, two locations. And what will be your 3 to 5 priority values, or qualities might be another word, if you prefer.
So what's coming up for me when I think about that future state is family is very much a value held in all the versions of that. So I would say family. I think of another value is authenticity and really living the way that feels authentic to me then, even if it's not what would be authentic to me now, right? Like allowing growth and change. I'm struggling to think of another value. Yeah.
These are arbitrary numbers, so don't,
Yeah, those are the two that come to mind. I guess another value I would say too is I really have been thinking a lot deeply in the last few years about how to age well and how to start thinking about my health from an aging perspective. And, that journey has gone well and not well at the same time. And, we all have ways we can improve, but I was in all my research been so taken by the fact that it's not hard. It just requires diligence and repetition and staying on some simple practices. So I'm really trying to think about, at the middle age I am now, just really taking in these habits so that I can maybe be somewhere different in 20 years physically than I know people of that age to be. And so yeah, I think another value is going to be health. And it's another reason why I really love the idea of being in a city in 20 years for some of the time is just keeping movement and activity and stimulation of the mind all part of the daily
Mhm.
routine. Uh,
Right.
so that's definitely another big value I think is implicit in that dream ahead.
So we're coming into the home stretch here. And this next question is around the communities in which your preferred futures happen. And so, for your preferred future to be possible, what does the community need to include or provide?
What's coming up for me is, and this is, I hadn't really thought of this, Debilyn, as something I'm worried about, but I think I am worried about it. The community has to want to community. The community has to want to connect. And one of my saddest moments in parenthood is when my kids were at a restaurant and no knock on parents who iPad at restaurants. We're all just trying to survive and get by. I get it.
Yep.
My kids do not, and they love to talk to other tables and just little side chats, hello, kind of what we know to be normal in our neck
Right.
of the woods. And they'll say hi to a kid who just cannot, like they're not, they're just eyes away from an iPad and they don't know how to interact with my kids. And it makes me so sad that there's going to be a day where my kids just like don't think it's worth it anymore because no one's on the other end of the call. No one's on the other end of the conversation. So why don't I just go into the iPad too?
Oof.
So I think the community needs to want to community. It needs to want to connect. It needs to want to engage. And I think that I read a lot about the crisis of isolation and loneliness and how that's having such an impact on democracy and all true. But what happens when we're starting to choose it and the will to connect is just dissipating? So I think that is a real concern for me.
Right?
And that needs to be in the community for it to work.
Right. This might be where Prince Edward Island starts to look better and better
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Yeah. Is there anything else that your community needs to support or provide for your preferred future?
I mean, very tactically, like I have no idea where the United States will be in relation to other countries, particularly Canada in 20 years when we may be wanting to be doing this sort of two location living. Um, and would we even be able to get into Canada? Not. So we'd need to be provided some access to the land that we own. And, we need and this is something we thought a lot about. One of the reasons that we decided to pull the trigger much sooner than we planned to on buying the land was there was some concerns about whether or not, now don't cite me on this, anybody, but we had been hearing some rumblings that it would get harder for
Mm,
foreigners to buy land in Canada.
right.
And so while we thought this would be a great retirement plan someday, we were like, maybe we buy now in case that opportunity is not available to us when we're ready to do it. So I think we've always been just cognizant, of course, of like you can't just like walk into another country. So we need some things provided there for us to have even just a life, any version of a life there. And of course, like affordability. Also, when you think about like living in the city, like there's a real price point where we can't support that. So certainly providing some sort of either way for expenses to make that lifestyle possible or for other income to supplement it.
All right. Yeah, you're resonating a lot with things that I'm hearing from other interviewees
Mm,
too. So you're not alone in all of this.
I can't wait to hear it all.
Yeah, and we're getting down here to the last question, and this is where I really want you to highlight like some of the work that you're doing right now, and make sure to include invitations and links and things, and we can put those in the podcast notes as well. So what are you doing right now to help influence or co-create the community that's going to support you in your preferred future? And what can other people do?
Yeah. So I work, as you said earlier, for a group that helps funders learn, experiment, collaborate on any number of things, but the thing they all have in common is to strengthen American democracy. And so we're not donor advisors, but we are helping funders who are trying to think about how they strengthen American democracy, be more knowledgeable, be more connected to their peers, and ultimately invest in a way that maximizes their resources. So we're doing a lot of work right now, to support a democracy, a vision of an American democracy that I feel like is really, I know it's necessary for my personal vision to be accomplished. So that's a major part of it. It's a little bit of helping the people who help the people who help the people, but I do think the upstream nature of the work has a real critical role as well. One of the things we're focused on, and I loved the question you posed here on what does civic engagement mean? We run a civic language perceptions project, and we have for the last 5 years. And the short of it is that there really is this sense, particularly from our funders who are members, but more broadly, the sentiment coming to us sounds something like the coded and loaded nature of words today is so untenable. Are there even words I can say anymore? And people feeling like I used to say words like democracy and patriotism and liberty, and now I'm sending out many signals, and I don't even know if I mean to, and I don't know if it's constructive or destructive, and it just seems like a big mess. And like, someone help me is essentially the question at our doorstep. So we ran 3 rounds of research over the last 5 years with Americans to get their perceptions of words that are commonly used in democracy and civic engagement work, and just some really fascinating findings. I think the important note is that Americans are overwhelmingly positive on civic terms. I think our data often flies in the face of a lot of the polarization narratives that are out there. But don't misunderstand me, because our data does support that we are different in our perceptions of words, particularly and most predominantly by political party and political ideology. We're not that far apart on gender. We're not that far apart on community type, rural, urban. We're not that far apart, frankly, even on race. But when we're looking at our political identities, we see these very big gaps in how we perceive the terms, and those being kind of where the lightning rods are, I think, in language. So it's just a very fascinating project about how central words are to our ability to connect and understand each other, and where words might be getting in the way, and where we can frankly navigate more effectively in that. So that's a lot of the work I do in that front. And then Debilyn, the other thing I would say too is that, just to touch quickly on the school that my husband and I run, my husband works in finance, I work in philanthropy. Like, we are not daycare, we're not likely daycare owners. We are parents who had an unfortunate situation. The state closed down the center we were
Oh,
at, and we had nowhere to turn.
right.
And the places that were available to us were either going to require I took on a second job, like
To
truly
pay
to
for it.
afford, or one of us was going to have to leave our job, or we were just going to have to get really comfortable with care we were very concerned with. And so naturally, after the state closed down the place we were at, that third option wasn't viable.
Right.
And we just didn't know what to do. Even if we could map ourselves even to the support financially what we needed to do, like if we could figure out how we get more money into the equation, there wasn't even a spot available for 10 months in our town or any neighboring towns. So we were stuck, and we were frustrated, and we were really at our end of our rope. Um, and we were like, what if we started the daycare that we feel like every family deserves? One where families are part of the partnership, not seen as the problem, where teachers were really taken care of, and not seen as cheap labor that people will just fly through as warm bodies, but really invested in as teachers during this critical development of early childhood. So we built it, and we started it 2 years ago, and it's been one of the brightest spots in our lives. But it has illuminated a ton, and I mean, articles all the time about the fractured nature of childcare infrastructure in the United States, but
Yeah.
we're living it day in and day out, and feel really grateful we were able to carve out this little community of people who really see care, not as a business. It is a business to my husband and I, but it's a business that we've designed to basically break even. And really what we're trying to do is just take care of the people who are involved, the parents who are there, the kids who are there, and the teachers who are there. So yeah, I think that plays a role in this. I don't really totally know where. I think it's mostly been a real lesson in, like, I can talk up here, but when it comes down to it, you really got to be the one who steps up in your community to make some change. And that has been what this really was for us.
Yeah. Well, I love what you're talking there about how, in your day job, shall we say, you're working with the people who want to help the people who want to help the people, and you're several steps removed from this grassroots level, like every day, every parent need for childcare. And I love that you and your husband had the agency and the vision, quite frankly, to say, in order to get what we want for our kids, we're going to have to do this ourselves. And you gathered the community around you, right? And figured out what is the I would call it the triple bottom line. What is the win-win-win for the people, making sure it's breaking even and helping the community as a whole. The triple
Yeah.
bottom line, for those who don't know, is people, profit, planets, and it's another metric that moves beyond the bottom line that most corporations use, or most businesses use, which is simply profit. So I really applaud you for that, because it is that kind of grassroots level. How can we serve our community space? And what I hear from you is it's also enriching your heart and your soul.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been frankly a healing journey for my family, given the circumstances that started us. But it was also it was a real point of like, if we don't do something, like what is the plan here? So the center that closed down, there was a lot of families. We weren't the only family, obviously.
Right.
And so all of us were without care. And, we did the thing where we got on a bunch of waiting lists and everyone was like, good luck, it's not happening. But so then we proceeded with this plan and really like allowed ourselves the space to dream and really be like, could we do this? And we kept taking one step after one step. And all of a sudden we were doing it. And 2 days before we were signing the lease with the landlord, we got an email that the best daycare in town was willing to take us off the waiting list.
Whoa.
And it
So
was
this is the test that happens in every growth opportunity, I just want to say.
I'm so glad you said that because I was like, this is so weird. I was like, the universe is truly, this is by design. And
Yeah,
we had to really have a 48-hour like blitz of soul searching about like, we're being given a golden parachute here, right? Like this is the daycare. It's 3 houses, it's 3 buildings down from our house. We could walk there. And it was like,
right,
are we doing that and taking what is a good option for us on many levels, but then abandoning what was
right,
a plan for many, many, many families in the
right.
community. And really a play at trying to do daycare in a different way so that
Hmm.
parents kind of like see a standard that they should expect because we're offering it that would make the other places around that we don't feel like are in that standard really rise to that. So anyway, we move forward with our plan, but it wasn't without its test, as you say, for sure.
Well, and I have to remember that like as a podcaster, I'm supposed to be nosy sometimes, and
Yeah.
sometimes I'm supposed to respect boundaries. Um, and so do you want to share with our listeners like what your circumstances were that required this different childcare or had different childcare needs?
We were very transactional, drop your kid off. Maybe you said hello to somebody in the parking lot, but that was the end of it.
Right.
And one of the biggest heartbreaks for my husband and I was, the weekend that we were all getting phone calls from the state, there was just a flurry of Facebook activity. And I'm a millennial. We're not really on Facebook. So it was like, that says a lot that we were like, where do we go? I guess Facebook. And it was like, do you know what happened? Do you know what happened? All of these people just fast, 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 fast connecting. And then, we got to know these families a little more and a little more. And they're our dearest friends now and really had this experience that brought us together. But what we realized is that we were all individually having yellow flags. And if
Mm,
we had been connecting before, we would have
right.
realized that the aggregation of the yellow flags was one huge red flag,
Yeah.
but we were not connected. And so that is one of the core elements of the center we set up was like, you don't have to be best friends with all the parents here, but you better believe if there's 2 parents in front of me, I'm introducing them. I'm making sure everyone knows each other. We've got
Right.
the cell phone list available to you. It's like, it's really important. At before that experience, it felt like the nice thing to do as just a neighbor and a community member and hello. Now I realize it's like the necessary thing to keep my kids safe. And I wish I didn't have to learn that lesson the way I learned
Mhm.
it, but I did. And I think that is a lesson not just for my parenting journey, but life in general. And getting back to the comment I said earlier about like the community's got to want a community.
Yeah.
You've got to want to connect because it's not just, again, a nice thing to do. It's how we keep ourselves safe and alive.
Right.
And that is a real lesson that I've learned.
Something I've been thinking about, and I know we're here just at the end of the interview, but I just want to drop this in because I'm about to write a blog, and I may end up doing a special edition Terrified Nation podcast on it. But there's this idea that some people have about freedom, that freedom means I'm not accountable. I can do whatever the hell I want.
Mm,
And I suggest that for democracy, freedom actually happens through accountability because we are accountable to each other and to our neighbors and to the nation and to the process of democracy. Democracy is a process. It's a messy process, but it's the freedom actually only happens through accountability.
mm.
And so I just want to like drop that in there as a thought that
Yeah. Yeah, I want to think on that more. So freedom was the number one rated word for us in our survey, and it really shocked us. It didn't shock us that freedom was rated high, but it shocked us how high. So in 2021, when we ran 5,000 Americans, nationally representative sample set, the most positive word, all the different ways we cut the data, was unity. And it was unity at about 71% positive overall.
Okay.
Saw that go up, a little below that, depending on the group, but that's the level we were talking. And now in this next round of research, we included new words. Freedom was one of the new words. So we don't have a 2-year look at this, but it's at 87% positive.
Yeah.
And unity is still at about 70, and it's middle of the pack. So something really interesting happened where we're seeing kind of on the whole more positivity from Americans on these civic words, but freedom at the top. And it's created a lot of conversation around me, which is just dipping into larger conversations I know that are happening in our country around freedom. But one of the more fascinating foods for thought that a partner left in a conversation with me was like, it's such like, are we talking about freedom to or freedom from? And I think that ties to some of what you're saying there too.
Absolutely
Like,
does.
it's like, what version of this relationship of freedom are we
Mhm.
talking about? And I think you're absolutely right that the definition of freedom as I can do whatever I want is a real challenge, and definitely one that I think has fed a lot of the groups and the philosophies that have steered us away in the last few
Yeah.
years.
Yes. Well, and I think freedom gets used by, I'm going to drop another term in here, because if anybody has listened to many episodes of this, they know that the conflict profiteers are who I have identified as the enemy, so to speak,
Yeah.
of the United States right now. And conflict profiteers will take these words that you've done a lot of analysis around and use them in a very targeted, specific meaning way to divide us.
Mhm.
And the woke anti-woke thing right now, being an example, or patriotism. It used to be great to be a patriot, and I know all my progressive friends now who are like, no, I'm not a patriot because those people are the racist white guys.
Yep.
It's just crazy that we don't have common language anymore. So I really want to thank you for doing your work.
Yeah, I'm
And,
glad
and
it helps. Yeah, it's fascinating work, and we just did a whole thing on patriotism, so we have a lot of interesting insights. And yeah, it's a complicated word for
so,
sure.
so Amy, if people want to read more about the language, the use of language, where would they go and find that information to read up on it?
Yep, the landing for all of that is www.pacefunders.org/language. And PACE is PACE. That is where that's kind of the front door to this project. So you can go there and find everything from different infographics related to some of these topics we've talked about. You can access a dashboard that has all of our data so you can find your own details that you're interested in. And there's just a whole bunch of stuff, including webinars to join or review and lots of ways to engage.
Great. So that's pacefunders.org/language. And as we wrap up, I'd like to end our interview with an invitation. This invitation is to take 5 minutes every day to think about this preferred future that we've just kind of outlined and looked at, feeling those feelings that you identified, and add a sense of awe and wonder. And there's science behind this. Neuroscience research is showing that we will subconsciously create that which we focus on. And so by spending even 5 minutes a day thinking about our preferred future, we make it much more likely that we will subconsciously make choices to bring it about. It's our choice. We can actually co-create the future that we prefer. And it's, a lot of what you're already doing, Amy, and I just want to say thank you for that. For listeners out there, if you would like to participate in this national research project, visit americanfuture.us. Thank you, Amy, so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, in closing today's show, I want to thank you, the listeners, for giving a damn about our nation. We may be a terrified nation today, but we can do better. We can save the USA. Join me next time.
So that's it for today's episode of Terrified Nation. Head on over to iTunes or wherever you listen to subscribe to the show. You can get advance notice of new episodes and bonus content by signing up. Head over to terrifiednation.com and join us on the next episode.